YouTube? It's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, and we're talking about Auburn football like it's nobody's business. Today we're going to be featuring Auburn versus Texas A&M, one of the best new rivalries in the SEC West. I hope you guys enjoy this video. This is a preview of the Texas A&M game as Auburn, as we reach this point, Auburn will have already played Oregon, Kent State, and Tulane, and this will be their first game in the SEC. They'll be taking the trip down to College Station. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Back in 2012, in an expansion effort, the SEC welcomed two teams out of the Big 12, Missouri and Texas A&M. Since their arrival, they have had a very interesting impact on the SEC. Texas A&M coming in, storming into the SEC with a very, very good record that year. Johnny Manziel took the SEC by storm. They defeated Alabama that year on their way to Texas A&M, producing a Heisman Trophy winner out of Johnny Manziel in 2012, as well as Missouri, who has been very competitive in the SEC East since their arrival, having consecutive SEC championship appearances, one in 2013 and one in 2014. Auburn has a very interesting knack for creating rivalries with teams because of their dramatic finishes and their memorable moments in these games. Texas A&M is nothing different. Now, the first game in 2012 for Auburn versus Texas A&M, it marked the first appearance of Texas A&M in Jordan Hare Stadium, and it was one to remember if you're a Texas A&M Aggie. Johnny Manziel just rolled up the yards against Auburn on their way to a 63-21 win over Auburn in that particular game. Now, when I didn't get a chance to look at that game, 2012 was a very abysmal year for the Auburn Tigers. You're talking 3-9 overall, 0-8 in the SEC. Things were just going spiraling out of control, and the Texas A&M was basically a culmination of all the things that had led to that point. Texas A&M was absolutely unstoppable in that particular game, and it was just arguably one of the more embarrassing losses in Jordan Hare Stadium that I know of in recent history. Texas A&M rolled up 63 points, and I'm not too sure if that's not the most points actually scored ever in Jordan Hare Stadium. One thing about Auburn defense is they are not particularly known for giving up a lot of points, and that 63-21 game for Auburn definitely stuck out like a sore thumb. 2013 for the Auburn Tigers, going into the Texas A&M game, actually coming off of a very, very positive second half at LSU in Baton Rouge, outscoring the Tigers 21-14 in that second half, gave some promise. The run-pass option was really starting to click for Nick Marshall and Trey Mason, but no one really knew what to expect from the Auburn Tigers, who came into that game in 2013 ranked number 24 in the country, and Texas A&M ranked number 7. It was a very hard-fought battle by each team, a back-and-forth game. Auburn had no answers for Johnny Manziel and Chad Evans, number 13, the wide receiver for Texas A&M. But in this particular game, Nick Marshall showcased his abilities as a run-pass option quarterback, really put himself in the national spotlight, as well as Trey Mason. This is the game where we really started to see how this run-pass option was going to look down the stretch for the Auburn Tigers back in 2013. Some very heroic efforts, like I said before, although the defense really didn't stop Manziel and the onslaught of the Texas A&M offense, but they made the right plays at the right time. And Auburn just stayed in the game, and kept fighting to give themselves an opportunity late in that ball game to basically come up with one of the bigger upsets in recent history for the Auburn Tigers over Texas A&M down in College Station, putting constant pressure on Johnny Manziel at the right times. A lot of times the pressure even still converted into big plays for Texas A&M, but Auburn definitely prevailed in that game. And that was the game, guys and gals, in 2013 that led the fan base to believe that led the fan base to think, you know what, Auburn might actually be on to something here in this 2013 season. And it was culminated by a sack at the end of the game, by D Ford. This was a huge, huge victory in 2013 that led to the momentum down the stretch in 2013 as Auburn was basically dominating Georgia. They kind of collapsed there in the third quarter, and then the prayer in Jordan Hare Stadium. That was history there. Auburn in a back and forth game against Alabama. We all remember the kick six on to the SEC championship game against Missouri, and seconds away from winning the second national title in 3 years for the Auburn Tigers. One in 2010, could have been one in 2013, seconds away, surrendering the game to, ironically, the current coach for Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. Now we look over to 2015. Now, see, when we talk about the Auburn and Texas A&M game, not necessarily so much for Texas A&M, but usually when Auburn has beaten Texas A&M, it's usually a bounce back game or it's a very pivotal game in the season. In 2015, things were not going so well for Auburn. Quarterback situation. The defense was highly inconsistent. The thing is, had a great running back in Javon Robinson and Peyton Barber, but really couldn't get things clicking for the Auburn Tigers. So here we are in 2015. Auburn takes the trip down to College Station yet again with Jeremy Johnson as the starting quarterback. And Auburn had a very, very good game plan call based on Jeremy Johnson being the quarterback. And Auburn goes down to Texas A&M, basically salvaging the season in 2015 with Auburn winning down in College Station. Same thing in 2017, taking the trip out to College Station and Auburn winning out there as well, starting the momentum for the Tigers down the stretch in 2017 with victories over number one teams in the month of November. Georgia and Alabama led to an SEC championship game appearance and a New Year's Six Bowl in 2017. We fast forward this thing to 2018. Auburn with a little bit more expectation coming into the 2018 season. Things weren't going so well. It seemed like things were kind of spiraling out of control for the Auburn Tigers. And, this game was no different. 2018, Auburn met up with the Texas A&M Aggies again, just searching for answers, searching for something to give to salvage what could have been a great season. Auburn earlier in that year, losing by a field goal to LSU when it seemed like the game was all but won for the Tigers. Auburn up 21-10 late, sort of late in the fourth quarter, giving up that big play. Deshaun Davis and Daniel Thomas with the misread, giving up a big play. LSU in that particular game. LSU subsequently winning that game by a field goal. Now, I will note in that LSU game, that was arguably the best game, I think, for the defense. And the defense really didn't play the same after that particular game. You're talking about the stretch between Mississippi State and Alabama, where the Auburn defense gave up about 488 yards per game. They surrendered about 28 yards per game. And on the offensive side of the field, they just weren't able to maintain yards or time of possession to put the defense in a position to be successful. Also, the Auburn defense was really, really not good at getting teams off of the field, as most teams down that particular stretch average about 20 plus first downs per game. If you all know, you give up first downs, it's pretty hard to win, especially in the SEC when those plays really start to add up in the second half with that physicality and the depth of most of the SEC team, and really not so much SEC teams, but just Power 5 teams in general. That depth starts to add up. So Auburn comes into the Texas A&M game first part of November. Things were kind of clicking pretty good for Auburn at first. They got a couple of turnovers, got a turnover early in the game, had some nice plays. As a matter of fact, you talk about the lateral to Ryan Davis, finds Sal Cannella wide open in the end zone. A few good plays by Jarrett Stidham early in that game. But one thing that I noticed in this particular ball game in 2018 against Texas A&M, Auburn had a really strange trend, especially in the big games, against SEC teams, they tend to give up points just before the second half. And, that's something that can lead to momentum because, as a matter of fact, Texas A&M scored a touchdown late in the first half against Auburn and then had the ball back. And that's something that you really, really want to avoid as a defense, giving up those late touchdowns just before the second half. So that was the case here. Now, this particular game, Noah Igbenogany made quite possibly one of the biggest plays on defense for the year, creating some massive momentum for the Auburn Tigers in that particular game. And Auburn goes on in an improbable comeback from behind win over Texas A&M in 2018. Now, we look at the Texas A&M Aggies from a preview standpoint. Last year going 9-4, missed a possible 10-win season by losing to Auburn. The passing game really could take a step forward with Kellen Mond returning. This is actually his third year as a starter. Jimbo Fisher has a very, very good track record with quarterbacks. They have a great crew of receivers coming back. Now, linebacker is one of the places that we really have to look at, because if you look at Terrell Dotson and Otario Alaka, they're gone. As a matter of fact, if you look at the highlights of the Texas A&M Auburn game from this past year, Ontario Alaka put a very good hit on Boobie Whitlow early in that game, but they made some efforts to fix this problem. They signed 5 linebackers in the 2019 recruiting class, 2 of which were able to participate in spring practice. So that was a huge thing for the Auburn Tigers. And for the Texas A&M Aggies. Sorry about that, guys. For the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, you look at some big games for Texas A&M going into the 2019 season. Early in the season, Texas A&M is going to have a battle with Clemson. They got to go down to Death Valley this time. If we remember that game from last year, Texas A&M was just a few plays away from actually pulling that ball game off, which would have been an epic win for the Texas A&M Aggies. Also got to go on the road against Georgia. So this is going to be a huge thing for the Texas A&M Aggies going in the 2019 season. Now, one of the guys that I feel that's going to be very crucial for Texas A&M to have to replace is Travion Williams. He was a very, very good mainstay at the running back position. Very, very productive as a running back for the Texas A&M Aggies. And when you look at it moving forward, he's going to have some very, very, they're going to be that. Those are some very huge shoes to fill for the Texas A&M Aggies. But who they're going to be looking at to take over is sophomore Jashawn Corbin, who had a very, very good game. He has some very good production even against Auburn. So he is the guy that they're going to depend on for the most part to make this thing happen. Also looking at a very, very decent defensive line led by Justin Matabuke, who had a very good showing against Auburn as well. So we look for the Texas A&M Aggies. Second-year coach Jimbo Fisher has won a national championship before, coming off a number 4 recruiting class, to be very competitive in the SEC this year. Some great receivers in Courtney Davis, Jamon Osborne, and one of my favorite guys to watch is Kendrick Rogers. He's the guy with the yellow hair, so look out for him. But either way, we look forward to this game. This is going to be the first SEC game for the Auburn Tigers against Texas A&M. Always exciting. Usually the away team wins, but Auburn stopped that trend this year in an unlikely fashion. Auburn only racked up 225 yards in that game. That's not racking up. That's just barely making it, but still managed to win that game over Texas A&M in 2018, breaking the trend of the away team winning. We'll see what happens this year. This is the preview of the Texas A&M Auburn game for 2019, one of the premier developing rivalries in the SEC West. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast on Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. You all have an incredible afternoon.